Welcome to Chapter 8 of The Divide. Please like and subscribe. After finishing breakfast, Julia and Maddie got dressed and made their way downstairs. Exiting the main building, they stepped out into the courtyard where the morning exercise was going to take place. They stood back for a moment and observed all the students filing out of the dorm buildings. The boys came from the left and the girls from the right. The way they all walked, it was in perfect unison, like a marching band coming together and lining up for a parade. Suddenly, a familiar yet unpleasant voice spoke out to Julia and Matthew. It was Clarice. "I take it your sleep went well," she said with slight trepidation in her voice. Julia gave a smile and answered, "Yes, thank you. We had a wonderful rest." And Maddie answered in his charming way, "We did. It was beautiful." Clarice ignored Matthew for the moment and continued, "Julia, us 10th graders line up close to the back, while little Matthew lines up closer to the front." Clarice then turned to Matthew with a mischievous look. "I thought it would be nice," she said, "to give you a guide of sorts. Someone who can care for you in a way you should be cared for. So, I would like to introduce you to Hans." Maddie suddenly felt his body being eclipsed under a giant shadow. Turning around, he saw one of the biggest, largest, hugest, and whatever other adjective you would like to describe, he saw a very, 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 very big boy. Hans was massive. He looked like an Easter Island head that came to life, something Maddie was about to point out, yet as he observed how big the boy was, he rethought and decided it's in his best interest to keep that observation to himself. Rather, he politely introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Matthew. Nice to meet you, Hans." Hans replied with a blank expression and a low grunt from his closed mouth. Clarice then spoke. "Hans, you and Matthew are in the same class. Please escort him to your place in the courtyard." Hans pointed in front of them and opened his mouth to speak. "Go," he said in a deep voice. Julia looked at Maddie with slight concern, as if asking him if he would be okay. Matthew smiled at Julia and spoke. "Don't worry, I got this, sis." He then turned to Hans. "Ready when you are, Hansi. I can't wait to see you try a jumping jack, my friend. That's gonna be a world shaker." Matthew, of course, hoped this small joke would break the ice, yet it did not. Hans' stern lips replied again with one word. "Go." Maddie shrugged his shoulders in disappointment, then waved Jules goodbye and left to join his class. Clarice now directed Julia to their own class. As they walked, Julia could still sense an underlying aggression from Clarice. Yet, as long as that aggression was on the inside, Julia didn't mind at all. They soon arrived at their class, and Julia joined a straight line of 10th graders, all of which by now were standing perfectly still and in silence. The sound of a horn suddenly rang out. Little by little, the growing volume of marching could be heard. Coming into view in front of the rows of students were the seniors, all marching into place to face the student body. They were wearing a different color uniform than the other children. The others, including Julia and Matthew's uniforms, were dark blue and gray, very typical private school colors and attire. Yet the seniors wore rust red and tan. The boys with rust red jackets and tan pants, while the girls shared the same jacket, yet wore modest tan skirts. Julia scanned through the seniors, observing them one by one, when she saw the swimmer from this morning. Now, with him out of the pool, she captured a much better look of his appearance. He was tall, skinny, yet strong, with a nose that looked like it belonged on a prince. His hair was light brown and his eyes were green. As Julia stared away, suddenly all the seniors, including the swimmer, screamed out in unison one word: "Listen." This led to all the other students repeating back in unison, "Listen." Next, the seniors shouted, "Obey," followed by the entire school shouting back, "Obey." And finally, the seniors yelled out, "Fight for the day." This finisher led to an almost war cry sound of everyone repeating, "Fight for the day." Julia spotted Maddie ahead of her. He was looking around to find her, wanting to share a look of shock of the weirdness of it all. Yet before he could find her eyes with his own, everyone started a routine of morning stretches, which of course Maddie also joined in on. The movements mimicked Tai Chi. They were slow yet forceful. It was like learning how to fight, but in extreme slow motion. The exercises took 10 minutes or so, and it ended with a 3-word chant from everyone: "Fight, fight, fight." Afterwards, all the students stood still until their class began to file into the building, starting with grade 1, then grade 2 and 3, and so forth. Julia watched Maddie enter into the school building with class 5. He was having fun mocking the Tai Chi moves as he went. This gave Julia a laugh, while at the same time a sound of disgust could be heard from Clarice, who was also watching Maddie. A few minutes later, it was class 10's turn. Julia walked behind Clarice as they marched in a straight line into the building. Making their way out of the courtyard and up the staircase, Julia could hear Clarice whisper something to the girl in front of her. The girl had long black hair and heavy toner on her face that darkened her Asian complexion. She looked deadpan, yet something about her seemed interesting. Clarice then shoved the girl slightly as if wanting her to do something. The girl finally shuffled her hand out of her pocket. She was opening something, but Julia couldn't see clearly what it was. A few seconds later, Julia walked up onto the 4th stair in the staircase, when suddenly her prosthetic leg slipped violently and she flew back. Julia lost complete control of her body, and it seemed like she was going to land on the back of her head. With her eyes closed, she braced for the pain. Yet just then, a hand grasped at her arm, keeping her from crashing down. Julia opened her eyes to find herself being saved by the boy in the swimming pool. "Be careful," he said as he gently raised her up. "Even for a hero like you, those stairs can be a little dangerous." Julia smiled in gleeful appreciation, and she was all set to give him a huge thank you when she briefly got distracted from the boy's wrist, which she was holding on to. She glanced down and saw what appeared to be a bullet wound, fresh at that. The boy winced in slight pain, then yanked his arm away to fully cover his wrist with his shirt. Quickly he smiled and introduced himself, as if to make sure his wrist wasn't a subject of a conversation. "My name is Ryan," he said while clearing his throat. "You know, these stairs usually aren't slippery." He then paused as he glared up at Clarice and her friend. "I don't expect that they'll be slippery again." Clarice and her friend knew he was talking to them, yet they gave no answer. Clarice quickly whispered to her friend, then giggled as she pulled her friend up the stairs. "Don't mind them," Ryan spoke to Julia. "They seem to be the jealous type." "Jealous?" Julia questioned. "Of who?" "Of you, superhero," Ryan replied with a smile. "You know, they're kids. They haven't seen anything or even experienced anything. Yet, anyway." Ryan paused and thought as he said that last part. "But," he continued, you have experienced a lot, and others, they just don't understand how life changes, you know?" "Yeah," Julia replied. "I know." "Anyway," Ryan said as he went to join his class, "don't you miss your class. They're already ahead of you. See you around, Julia." "Definitely," replied Julia with a smile. "Definitely."